I remember the night everything changed. The night the truth I had ignored for far too long finally stood in front of me, undeniable, unshakable, and cruel. It wasn't just betrayal. It was the kind that reaches into your chest and rips out the very trust you thought could never be broken. Daniel and I had been together for years. He wasn't just my boyfriend. He was my world, my future, the man I thought I would grow old with. And Melissa. She was my best friend since childhood. She knew all my secrets, all my fears, all my dreams. Together, the three of us were inseparable. Or at least, that's what I thought. Looking back, the signs were there. The missed calls. The late nights at work. The sudden closeness between Daniel and Melissa that I convinced myself was harmless. I silenced my doubts because I trusted them both too much to imagine they would ever betray me. But trust can be the cruelest lie we tell ourselves. The truth revealed itself not in whispers, but in a moment so sharp it cut through the fabric of my life. A party, music, laughter, people everywhere. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. Daniel and Melissa. The way they looked at each other, the touch of their hands when they thought no one was watching. A look too familiar, too intimate, too much like the way he used to look at me. My heart froze. Time stopped. I wanted to scream, to cry, to pretend I didn't see it. But my silence was over. That night, I exposed them. I let the truth spill out into the room like shattered glass, leaving them scrambling, denying, faces pale with guilt. And in that moment, I realized something powerful. Their betrayal wasn't my shame. It was theirs. The days after the party felt like waking up in a new world. My phone, once buzzing with messages from Daniel and Melissa, was silent. Not a call, not a text, not even a half-hearted excuse. For the first time in years, my life wasn't filled with their voices. And the silence, it was louder than anything I'd ever heard. At first it felt strange, almost empty. But slowly, I began to realize that emptiness was space. Space for me to breathe. Space for me to finally hear my own thoughts again. Of course, the fallout was everywhere. People who were at the party whispered about what they saw. Daniel's co-workers started putting the pieces together, realizing why he'd been distracted for months. His polished image of being reliable and successful cracked overnight. Melissa didn't escape it either. Friends she had known for years distanced themselves, no longer able to trust her. The girl who once sparkled with confidence now walked in the shadows of her own choices. But I didn't need to add to their punishment. I didn't need to keep chasing them. They were already running from the truth. And truth doesn't let you rest once it's out in the open. Healing wasn't instant for me. The night after the party, I cried harder than I had in years. Betrayal doesn't just take your trust. It takes your memories and poisons them. I looked at old photos of me, Daniel, and Melissa smiling together, and I asked myself, was any of it real? Did they laugh with me because they cared, or because they were hiding? Those questions haunted me for weeks. But slowly, I began to rebuild. Piece by piece, I started to find the parts of myself I had buried. I went back to painting, my brushes carrying emotions words couldn't. I started saying yes to things I had always put off. A trip with friends. Nights filled with laughter and music. Even simple sunsets that I used to ignore because I was too busy waiting on someone who was never really there. And through it all, I realized something powerful. They hadn't broken me. They had simply freed me. Freed me from lies, from doubts, from living a life where my trust was misplaced. One evening, weeks after the party, I got a message from Daniel. A long one. His words dripped with regret, with desperate promises to change. He wrote about how much he loved me, how Melissa meant nothing, how he wanted to start over. I read it once, then again, and then I deleted it, because sometimes the most powerful answer is silence. I didn't need to tell him he was done. My absence said everything. Melissa never reached out. Not directly. But I heard through mutual friends how she struggled. How she cried that everyone hated her. How she wished she could take it all back. But the truth is, she made her choice. And choices come with consequences. Months later, I saw her at a cafe. Her eyes were tired, her smile gone. For a moment, she looked at me like she wanted to speak, to explain, to apologize. But I didn't stop. I didn't need her words anymore. I nodded politely and walked past, because forgiveness had already happened in my heart, not for her, but for me. Forgiveness was my way of letting go, of refusing to let her hold any more power over me. And Daniel, he faded too. His once busy life slowed down. People no longer looked at him with admiration, but with disappointment. He became just another man who lost everything by betraying the one person who stood by him. As for me, I grew stronger. I realized betrayal can be a teacher. It shows you who never deserved your loyalty, but it also shows you who truly does. Some friends stood by me through it all. They came over with food, with laughter, with love. They reminded me that not everyone betrays, not everyone lies. They reminded me that family isn't always blood. It's the people who hold you when you break and cheer for you when you rise again. Betrayal doesn't just end relationships. It reveals them. And it revealed to me which ones were worth keeping, and which ones were better left behind. Life after betrayal isn't easy. There are nights where you still feel the sting, where you remember the lies, where you question your own worth. But each day, the wound closes a little more. Each day, you choose yourself a little more. And slowly, you stop carrying their betrayal like a burden. You carry it like armor. Because here's the truth I want anyone listening to understand. Betrayal never says anything about your value. It doesn't mean you weren't enough. It doesn't mean you failed. Betrayal only says everything about the person who chose to break your trust. Their actions reflect them, not you. And revenge? People think revenge is cruelty, anger, destruction. But true revenge is peace. True revenge is building a life so full, so bright, that the people who hurt you can't even reach it. True revenge is showing them they don't matter anymore, that they no longer have the power to touch your heart. I don't look back with hate now. I look back with clarity. Daniel and Melissa thought they destroyed me. But what they really did was give me a chance to rise. A chance to rebuild my life without lies. A chance to become someone stronger than I was before. And if you've ever been betrayed, I want you to hear this clearly. You will survive it. You will outgrow it. And one day, you'll look back and realize they didn't end your story. They only ended their role in it. And your story will continue, brighter, freer, and stronger than before. So let them go. Let the truth expose them. Let the silence finish them. And let your new life become the greatest revenge of all. Because betrayal is fire. And though it burns, it also clears the ground for something new to grow. And me. I'm still here. Stronger. Free. And finally, living the life they could never give me. Time has a way of revealing everything. Weeks turned into months, and the world kept moving forward, even when it felt like mine had been standing still. But as the days passed, I started to notice something. The weight on my chest began to lift. My smile stopped feeling forced. I no longer woke up thinking about what Daniel and Melissa had done. Instead, I woke up thinking about myself. Healing is strange. It doesn't happen all at once, like a switch you flip. It happens in little moments. The first time you laugh without it feeling heavy. The first time you realize you went a whole day without remembering their betrayal. The first time you look in the mirror and see strength instead of scars. Those small victories added up. And before I knew it, I was no longer surviving. I was living. And while I was rising, Daniel was falling. The man who once seemed so confident, so admired, was now whispered about wherever he went. People remembered the way I exposed him at the party, the way his carefully crafted lies crumbled in front of everyone. He tried to pretend it didn't matter, but people don't forget betrayal so easily. His reputation was gone, and without trust, even his career began to crack. Melissa wasn't spared either. She thought she could outlast the storm, thought people would eventually forget. But betrayal has a way of following you. Friends who once trusted her stopped calling. People saw her differently. She carried her choices with her, and they weighed her down everywhere she went. And me. My silence was the loudest revenge I could give. No angry messages. No late-night confrontations. No desperate attempts to prove my worth. Just silence. Just living. Just thriving in a way they could no longer touch. But here's what surprised me most. As I moved forward, I realized I didn't need them to suffer for me to feel whole. Their downfall wasn't the source of my peace. My peace came from letting them go. From realizing they no longer deserved a place in my life, my thoughts, or my heart. That was the real victory. Still, I won't lie. There were moments when I felt a quiet satisfaction. Seeing Daniel alone at gatherings where we once walked in together. Seeing Melissa shrink back when people whispered her name. It wasn't about cruelty. It was about balance. About knowing the universe has a way of returning what you give. They gave betrayal. And they received isolation. One night, I ran into Daniel again. He looked older, worn down. His charm was gone, his confidence replaced with regret. He tried to smile, tried to pretend nothing had changed. But his eyes told the truth. He was a man who had lost everything he thought he controlled. He asked how I was, his voice carrying a weight of hope that maybe I'd open the door again. I simply answered, "I'm doing better than ever," and walked away. That moment was worth more than any elaborate revenge could ever give me. Because true revenge isn't about destruction. It's about showing them they no longer matter. And Melissa. I saw her too, eventually. She tried to avoid me, ducking her head like a child caught in a lie. Once she almost approached me, her lips parting as if to speak, but then she froze. Maybe she wanted to apologize. Maybe she wanted to explain. But the truth is, it didn't matter anymore. An apology can't undo betrayal. Words can't unbreak trust. So I kept walking. I had already moved beyond her. That's the thing about betrayal. It feels like the end of the world in the moment. But in time, you realize it was only the end of their chapter in your story. And maybe that chapter needed to close for something better to begin. I started building new chapters. I traveled. I created. I met people who reminded me that not everyone betrays. I found joy in places I had forgotten to look. And with every new experience, I became more certain of one thing. Betrayal may wound you, but it can also shape you into someone stronger. The fire they lit to burn me down only cleared the way for me to grow. And so I carried on, not with bitterness, not with anger, but with a quiet strength. Because in the end, I realized the sweetest revenge isn't watching them fall. It's rising so high they can't even reach you anymore. And I was rising, higher than ever. Time passed, and life began to settle into something new. Not perfect, not painless, but mine. I had space to breathe, to grow, to rediscover the parts of myself I had neglected. And slowly, a realization began to take root. What I thought was the worst thing that ever happened to me had actually given me the greatest gift: freedom. But freedom doesn't come without shadows. There were nights when I'd still wake up wondering why. Why Daniel threw away years of love. Why Melissa destroyed a friendship built since childhood. Why the people I trusted most chose to betray me. Those questions never left completely. They lingered, soft but sharp, like old scars you can still feel when the weather changes. I stopped searching for their answers, because sometimes the truth is simple. People betray not because of who you are, but because of who they are. And no explanation can ever make it less cruel. That was when I realized something deeper. My revenge wasn't meant to be a single moment. It wasn't just the night I exposed them, or the silence I gave them after. My revenge was long-term. It was the life I would build without them, the happiness they would never share, the strength they could never take credit for. That was the real revenge, the kind that burns slow and lasts forever. In the months that followed, I changed. Not just on the outside, but on the inside. I started saying yes to things that scared me. I learned to trust myself again, even when I doubted. I stopped letting my worth depend on someone else's validation. For so long, I had lived in the shadow of their lies. Now I was standing in my own light, and they saw it. Oh, they saw it. Daniel tried again, of course. They always do. He sent another message, this time shorter, more desperate. Just 5 words: I miss what we had. I stared at those words, and for a moment, I almost laughed. Because what we had wasn't real. Not to him. Not when he was giving pieces of himself to someone else behind my back. Missing it wasn't the same as valuing it. He missed my loyalty. He missed my love. But he didn't deserve either. Not anymore. So I didn't reply. I didn't give him what he wanted, a reaction, a sign that he still mattered. Silence once again became my weapon. Because silence says more than words ever could. Melissa, on the other hand, disappeared from my world. No messages, no apologies, just absence. But I heard about her sometimes. The way her life grew complicated, the way people no longer trusted her, the way doors that were once open to her started closing. And though a part of me wished she had been brave enough to face me, I didn't need her to. Her absence was loud enough. I carried on. I created new memories. I started to feel joy again without questioning if it would last. And little by little, the pain of betrayal turned into something else: wisdom. I learned that betrayal doesn't mean the end of love. It doesn't mean you're unworthy. It means you were brave enough to trust, and they were weak enough to break it. I learned that revenge doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes, the quietest revenge is the most powerful. And I learned that endings, no matter how painful, can become beginnings if you're strong enough to rise again. Looking back now, I realize that exposing Daniel and Melissa at that party wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning. The beginning of me reclaiming my life. The beginning of me understanding my strength. The beginning of me walking away from people who never deserved to walk beside me. And so the story shifted. The pain turned into power. The heartbreak turned into healing. The betrayal turned into a freedom I never thought I'd have. Because in the end, they didn't destroy me. They freed me. They gave me the chance to build a life so much greater than anything I could have built with them. And that, I realized, was the greatest revenge of all. The moment came when I realized I was no longer looking back. For so long, every step forward had still been tied to the past, like a shadow trailing behind me. But then one day, I noticed something. The shadow was gone. I wasn't thinking about Daniel when I laughed with friends. I wasn't thinking about Melissa when I walked into familiar places. Their names no longer lived at the front of my mind. That was the climax of it all, the turning point where pain became power. Betrayal had taken its toll, but it had also carved space for something new. And in that space I grew. I grew stronger than I ever thought I could. There was a moment that sealed it. I saw Daniel again, unexpectedly, at a mutual friend's gathering. For a heartbeat, the air shifted. He looked at me like he always did when he wanted control, when he thought he could win me back with a smile. But this time was different. I wasn't the same person he had betrayed. I wasn't broken. I wasn't desperate. I was whole. He tried to talk, tried to rekindle even the smallest spark of what we had. But as he spoke, I realized something. I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, not even hate. Just nothing. And in that nothing there was freedom. He no longer had the power to stir my heart in any direction. He was just a man standing in front of me, and I was already miles ahead. Melissa was there too, sitting quietly at the edge of the room. Our eyes met for the briefest moment. Hers were filled with regret, with shame she couldn't hide. And yet, I didn't feel the urge to confront her, to demand answers, or to hear her apology. I didn't need any of that anymore. Because the truth is, when someone betrays you, their words become worthless. Only actions matter. And her actions had already spoken louder than anything she could ever say. That night, I left the gathering with my head high. Not because I won some battle against them, but because I realized the battle had ended long ago, and I had already walked away victorious. My victory wasn't in their downfall. It was in my strength to rise above them. The climax of this story wasn't the night of the party, when their betrayal was exposed. It wasn't the messages Daniel sent, or the silence Melissa left. The real climax was this: me living, breathing, thriving, without needing them. Me building a life that shined so bright their shadows could never dim it. Me choosing peace over pain, freedom over chains, and self-worth over betrayal. And that, I realized, was the